All right, so we're back at Cracks in Postmodernity with Carlos Eire, who teaches in the History and Religious Studies departments at Yale. He specializes in late medieval and early modern religious history. And more importantly, he's the author of De Flu, A History of the Impossible, which we're going to discuss today. So, Carlos, first of all, thank you for coming on. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to write this book in the first place.
Well, thanks for the invitation, first of all. Um, I decided to write this book a long time ago, actually 41 years ago. And I can almost date it. It was sometime in June, early June. So maybe today could be the
Could
anniversary
be, could be. Wow.
where I was visiting St. Teresa of Avila's first convent of the Incarnation in Avila, and was being shown around. And the tour guide was being very matter of fact about everything. Here's the kitchen, here's the refectory where they ate, here's the staircase where Teresa fell and broke her arm. And here's the spot where St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross levitated together for the first time,
Wow.
just as a fact. It was thrown at me as a fact. I had always been interested in the supernatural, and
Mhm.
actually all of my work, all of it, in one way or another, it focuses on the intersection between the natural and supernatural, and the way in which the supernatural is conceived, and the way in which the relation between the spiritual and material is conceived. So these physical phenomena of mystical ecstasy, uh, they always fascinated me. And of course, I didn't write for 40 years. I did research piecemeal here and there over the years.
Mhm.
I wrote most of the book uh, during the COVID plague,
Wow.
so 2020, 2021, 22. Uh, it all came together. And well, I'm glad I did it. Um, Somewhere along the way, before I got to Avila, uh, in graduate school, I had run into this book, The Physical Phenomena of Mysticism. And there are two books that were published just about the same time, one by Herbert Thurston and one by Montague Summers, both with the same exact title, The Physical Phenomena of Mysticism. And that's where I first encountered the long list that exists of physical effects of mystical ecstasy. So I had all that in the background brewing. Uh, and this, I think the fact that I didn't do it immediately in 1983 is very good. I have a much
Yeah.
different perspective on everything now.
Mhm. And you covered an interesting array of figures, ranging from people who were actually canonized saints, people who were frauds, people involved in witchcraft, spiritualism. You mentioned also that there are people in other religious traditions who have, stories of levitating. But tell us, like, how did you decide on the characters, the figures that you were going to focus on? Like, how did you narrow that down?
Yeah, well, the narrowing process was, I guess, it could be called organic. Which individuals left behind the richest cache of records and of testimonies about their levitations or bilocations. And also because the individuals I picked are all early modern. They just happened to have come along at a time when the church, Catholic Church, changed its approach to testimonies and began to gather testimonies in a much more scientific way, or what the Germans would call wissenschaftlich, right? It's very rational, and you apply the same criteria that you would to evidence in a court of law, basically. So the canonization proceedings, the inquests, first the beatification inquest, and then the canonization inquest for the individuals that I ended up writing about. Very, very rich, extremely rich. And this is where I relied uh, purely on logical, reasonable criteria about these beatification and canonization inquests, because the eyewitnesses who provide the testimony, most of them, if they are not nuns, monks, friars, or priests, they are very devoted religious people for whom lying is a mortal sin. And to lie, and for everybody to tell the same lie over and over again, to me, statistically, seems improbable for various reasons, not just the sheer numbers of testimonies, but also the fact that the people who are giving these testimonies have a fear of hell. Fear of hell has been driven into them from a very early age. And if not even fear of hell, fear of purgatory. I mean, lying is a sin. So the same as in a court of law, you can be slammed for perjury if you give false testimony. Well, God find you guilty of perjury if you've lied, even for good reasons. So we have the testimonies, and
Yeah.
that's why I picked these people.
But I find it interesting how you're using the term reason because so yeah, the easy kind of objection is okay, these people are lying because they're trying to push forward their kind of religious agenda, their propaganda. You're saying okay, but there are too many people. And also there's this fear of, divine retribution. The other objection would be okay, these people are all mentally ill, they're hallucinating,
Yes.
they're psychotic. But again, like could it be that this wide array of people all happen to have the same hallucinations?
Yeah.
So when you say reason, it's like, okay, like when you put all the pieces together, it makes sense that these are probably facts. No, not ones that we can square away with like empirical reason, empirical logic. But is reason limited to what's empirical? Is reason only what we can measure? So like you use reason, I would say like in the fullest, broadest sense of the term, which is kind of refreshing because I don't know, I think too many people if we limit reason to something that's just what we can measure, like that's very boring. If life is just that, then what are the
Yeah.
possibilities, And I
I
think this
agree.
is why like the book is there's something very hopeful, because it shows us that there's all these possibilities. The impossible is perhaps possible.
Well, this is the really the most significant point to consider in calling anything that we consider impossible possible is the relationship that exists between belief and events. And I've ever since the book came out, and even before it came out, when I gave public talks, I would get this question: well, why don't these things happen anymore? And I would have to say, yeah, well, they do happen. They just don't happen as frequently. And we just haven't caught anyone on film yet, doing this. But there are plenty of 20th century and even 21st century levitators and bilocators. But the fact is, and the fact remains, and historians of religion, even studying other religions other than Christianity or even other than Catholic Christianity, I've seen many of them argue that actually you need a context of belief for supernatural events to actually happen. That there is it's a two-way street. The context of belief and the frequency of these supernatural events, they are related. And in Christian history, you can go back to all the synoptic gospels in which Jesus is unable to perform miracles where there is lack of belief, or when he heals someone, he says, your faith has healed. At least the text as it reads, it's not, oh yeah, I healed you, or my father has healed you,
Yeah.
but your faith has healed you. It's kind of a stimulus response thing going on there, between the miraculous supernatural event, and people's belief in it.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask, have you ever studied any of the monasteries in Greece, particularly in Mount Athos, the island?
I know about Mount Athos, and I know about Greek monasticism, but have never studied it at any depth.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like you still have those stories of like miraculous levitations or whatever, or bilocation. Like today,
Mhm.
people who go to Mount Athos say that they see these things happening. And
Oh
I
yeah,
think it's a testament to what you're saying, like in a culture that is still very much immersed in faith, like these things are more likely to happen. But also like I think you cited Aquinas in the beginning of the book when he says that there are different types of miracles. So yeah, I mean, not as many people are levitating. I haven't seen anyone do it, but are there still miracles of some sort happening? I mean, I have to say yes. Like, even though I've never seen levitation, like I've seen things that I cannot attribute to some logical kind of, you
right.
know,
Well,
source.
no, definitely. And all my colleagues who work in Asian religion, when I would explain to them what my project was, were not impressed. Yeah, so what? Yes, of course.
Yeah.
You know, this is so much a part of the Asian monastic tradition. It's not unusual. Uh, I saw a documentary once actually about Tibetan monks, Tibetan Buddhist monks who go into a deep meditative state, or let's call it prayer or meditation, whatever. Um, they can regulate their core temperature to such an extent that and then this documentary, nailed it because they were there overnight filming this thing. They stayed up high in some mountain overnight and didn't freeze to death, even though the temperatures were way, way, way below freezing. They survived, and their temperature was being taken, right? So their core temperature was still unaffected by the ambient temperature.
Yeah.
And they weren't wearing coats either. They were
Hmm.
just wearing their, habits with one shoulder exposed. Uh,
Yeah. And but I was saying this to you before we recorded, like it's interesting that you're approaching these stories as a historian more so than, I mean, this isn't a work of theology, I wouldn't say. So I don't know, like what is that like for you looking at these accounts of the miraculous, of the supernatural as a historian, um, having respect for the theological implication. Like you're very, sensitive to the fact that, that is a piece of this, but you maintain this level of objectivity. Like how did you kind of pull off that balance while writing?
well, uh, history is a science. As a matter of fact, in some American universities, history uh, falls under social sciences rather than humanities. But history actually bridges humanistic studies and social scientific study. So objectivity is the prime directive, right? To reconstruct the past in a way that is logical and using testimonies that ring true. I've seen various historians use this term that it rings true. Something taken from music, it's the right note, but it rings true means it has a ring of authenticity, of facticity. So if you stick with those facts, you can be very objective. And in the book I make brief mention of this, that the grandfather of modern sociology, Ernst Troeltsch, came up with this concept of social facts. And what's a social fact? A social fact is any belief that is so deeply held that it's unquestionable. It's a fact. And religion is full of social facts, beliefs. People believe something is possible. It is possible. Uh, but there's also the concept of a wild fact or wild facts employed by a contemporary of Troeltsch, rough contemporary, William James, the American philosopher and psychologist. What's a wild fact? Wild fact is an anomalous event that defies explanation by anyone's current understanding of reality. And history is full of wild facts. So discerning when a wild fact, yeah, the wild facts are there, anomalous facts are there. History's full of them. Um, In
But
science, in science itself, no interpretation of reality is ever final. New discoveries are always being made. And the ancients were aware of this. St. Augustine, for instance, in the fourth and fifth century, talking about miracles, said that miracles are events that are not contrary to nature, but they defy whatever our current understanding of nature is. In other
mhm,
words,
yeah,
these wild facts, wonders, miracles, they happen, they cannot be explained uh, on scientific terms of current uh, agreement. Scientists currently agree about a specific thing being possible or not possible.
yeah, and it's interesting how you weave in these kind of anecdotes from like science history about like Newton and gravity, and then like the first hot air balloon, and you see like this I don't know, there's this levitation happening that's, according to different terms, happening through different lens. But then simultaneously, the church is modifying its way of verifying miraculous levitation with respect to these scientific discoveries. So, like, there's this kind of tension, this antagonism, but also this appreciation for the fact, like, yes, science is a way to, I don't know, like, it's a tool given to us by God to discern his workings in the world.
Yeah.
Like ultimately, science can be a religious endeavor, an attempt to understand God's creation, at least through that empirical lens. So I don't know. It's interesting how you weave that together and show the development of the Catholic Church's kind of position in relation to these developments.
Yeah, and these are not only weird phenomena, weird in the sense that they're anomalous and they defy the laws of nature as currently understood. But levitation seems to serve no purpose other than uh, manifesting a higher power.
Yeah.
In that respect, they're very different from healing miracles, but they're like testimonies of.
Yeah, and you see it when you recount these stories of like how the everyday townspeople reacted to seeing these levitating saints that like this kind of I don't want to say hysteria, but like people were really drawn. They really wanted to see these people flying, and it's because that it was a sign that, like as the title indicates, like the impossible is possible. It's a sign of hope that like God is transcending the circumstances of everyday life. God is entering into the concrete, which is the central claim of Christianity.
Right.
But like the thing that I want to kind of get into now is like when I first read the book, I was trying to figure out what kind of angle you're going to take. Like part of me was like, okay, you could do this from a very pietistic lens and be like, oh, look how holy these people were. And of course, it's all true. How could you doubt it? You could take this very materialist approach and say, yeah, it's all BS. They were lying. They were mentally ill. The church is trying to dupe the people so they could get more money. Um, but then you mentioned towards the end of the book, like right now we're in this quote unquote postmodern era where maybe not in the UK, as you were saying before, but like for many young people, we're more inclined to believe that supernatural occurrences will happen. No, I mean, it's not usually coming from like a very orthodox or dogmatic position, but yeah, like if you look at TikTok, there's all these different forms of spirituality that young people are drawn to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so like if you say like, oh yeah, that person flew 500 years ago, people will be like, oh yeah, okay, probably. I mean, if you believe it's true, but what you're doing, like, you're not taking this relativistic postmodern approach. Like, you're being a historian. You're saying, okay, is it a fact? Like, is there an indication they flew or not? Because if it's just like, oh, for me, I happen to believe it's true, it's not a fact. Like, does it objectively mean anything? It's like the method you use, it's like, I feel like it could only happen in these times, but it's its own thing. Like, it's not like the historical accuracy like adds something that I think today's kind of relativistic spirituality like is missing.
Well, I was trained never to delve into the reality of these anomalous events, but rather to just try to analyze what function they served. The function served by belief uh, in materialistic terms. well, what does it do socially, politically, economically, and so on and so forth, but not to ask the question, wait a minute, did this person really hover in the air? You can't, because you can't be proven. But I like the functionalist approach. It does help us make sense of these things, what function they serve and what function certain beliefs serve. And that's undeniable. I mean, that's a fact. But it's also a fact with a capital F that we have all these testimonies, and that the testimonies come from individuals being questioned under very, very specific circumstances that, much like in a court of law, attempts are made to preclude the potentiality of lying or presenting delusions as facts. So I think, given the fact that we do have so many testimonies, and as I also point out in the book, because of the different approach that Protestants took to it, to levitation, that we actually have instances where we have testimonies of Protestants levitating in which the narratives and the details are identical to those of Catholic testimonies. And to me, that's additional proof. Like, for instance, because we haven't covered this yet, I should mention that Protestants didn't think that levitation was impossible. They thought it was very possible.
Yeah.
But they attributed it to the devil rather than to God. And that's a whole other, that raises all other sorts of questions. But, when I found specifically one case of a girl in Boston in 1693 who levitated, and the men around her believed she was demonically possessed. The description of their attempts to hold her down as she went up, or to pull her down from the ceiling once she was up in the ceiling, they're identical, those testimonies, to those of Teresa of Avila, who had ordered her nuns to hold her down. Is it possible then, you can ask the question, okay, the Puritan clergyman involved in this event in Boston is Cotton Mather, leading Puritan in Boston. And he's brought other men into the room, and the men try to hold this girl down, and they can't. Afterwards, Cotton Mather asks these men to sign affidavits testifying to the reality of this event. And I'm thinking, as a historian, what chance is there of Cotton Mather having read accounts of St. Teresa's levitations? And I have to say, as a historian, the chances of Mather having read about Teresa's levitations and more or less inventing this event are very slim, or none at all. Knowing what distrust and actually repulsion Puritans felt about Catholic hagiographies, Catholic light in the cities. So just phenomenologically, the events are similar. Not similar, they're identical. What does one make of that? Were Cotton Mather's affidavits, the men's affidavits, were they all lying too? I think you can argue it's highly unlikely they're all lying.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to kind of, to close things up, I want to bring this onto a personal level. I'm wondering which of the stories that you wrote about which one spoke to you most? Like, which one really had an impact on you?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there are some that just sound so extreme that they actually don't have that much of an emotional impact on they didn't have an emotional impact on me. But the ones that actually had a very, very profound emotional impact are Teresa of Avila's own descriptions of her ecstasies and levitations and what it felt like for her to go up, to not be able to resist. And then her own explanations of what she thought was going on in the relationship between her body and her soul. And if you, no, let me rephrase that. I put myself in her place, considering how much trouble this caused her, because her superiors, some of them thought that she was, under the influence of the devil. And, she had to answer to the Inquisition. She had to answer to her superiors. She begged God to please stop doing this. Please stop it. For one thing, it hurts a lot. My body hurts afterwards. And the other is that, it gets me in trouble with the authorities because they suspect, demonic activity. Putting myself in her place, having things happen that you don't want to happen, that are irresistible. Now, I have never been in a similar situation, but I have been in situations where, the spiritual dimension of events have been observable to me. I have been able to observe them, or have actually felt in a very real sense the presence of the supernatural realm. And it's not delusion. It's real. It's definitely real. So her first person accounts, they're the ones that actually convinced me more than anything else. Because they stand in the context of the eyewitness accounts of nuns who said that they saw these things happen. But she's explaining them from her perspective as the person to whom they do happen. Life is, I think, even diehard materialists have events that they cannot explain. I think everyone does. Life is full of mysteries and mysterious twists and turns. And someone might dismiss them as silly. And I'll give you one example of something that happened to me recently, which many people might dismiss as totally silly. I've been living in the house I live in now, I've been living in for 27 years. Never saw a bear here, ever. But last summer, late summer, one night, I had a dream that there was a bear standing on my deck. And actually, the bear was right up against the French doors, with glass from top to bottom. Very real. And I actually woke up screaming at my son to get out of the way. Mm. It's so real. So where did this bear come from in my dream? Lo and behold, the very next day, and I swear to you, this is true. My wife wakes me up very early in the morning. And Carlos, come on. You gotta see this. We have a bear in the backyard.
Wow.
And I filmed the bear. He was there. Of course, somebody might say, oh yeah, in your town, there have been reports of bears occasionally. So you probably read about it. And it's just a coincidence, just a mere coincidence that you dreamt about a bear and a bear showed up the next day.
Yeah, no.
Precognitive dreams are, well-established fact people have. And I'm sure materialists can have precognitive dreams too, but how do you explain these things?
But
Uh,
even Freud understood. I mean, he was a materialist, but he still understood that there was like something more to dreams than just pure coincidence, you know?
yeah, yes, and those things are tied. And spiritual ecstasies of the sort that produced these levitations that I study in the book, mystical ecstasies, are altered states. Actually, the levitations that I studied, that I analyze in the book, they're all a side effect of mystical ecstasy. They're all a side effect that accompanies a cataleptic seizure, where the body freezes in whatever position it was when the ecstasy begins. And then the person who is in this state, they can be pricked with needles. You can put candles up to their eyes and they
Yeah.
won't blink, or a fly can land in their eye and they won't blink. There are many studies, psychiatric and medical studies of people who go into cataleptic seizures. And the phenomenon, as described, is identical to the seizures, to the ecstasies that produce these levitations. So no one doubts that there are cataleptic seizures.
Sure.
They're well studied. In the same way that now, since 1963, when CPR began to be applied to people who have heart attacks, near-death experiences, people who come back with, experiencing other dimensions or an afterlife, for lack of a better term. They're well studied. They've been studied scientifically. There's a lot of disagreement among doctors and scientists about what these are, but there's no denying the fact that they take place.
Yeah.
Um,
And I want to add just, I guess for me, there are two different levels of how this book impacted me. Because so I was saying too, like on a spiritual level, you see how these saints, the ones who are for real, had to put up with a lot of, I mean, I want to say persecution from their own religious orders, from the church. And you show why that was the case. Like you show the context. So like there were a lot of frauds. There was, you know, people relying on kind of dark spirits do the same exact thing. So you see why the church wanted to verify who was for real and who wasn't. But the fact that these people like continued staying within their communities, following the church, despite this kind of unjust treatment that they had, like it's a testament to the fact that like I don't know, they're certain that God put them in this position for a reason, and it's worth waiting it out, fighting it out. I think that's something very much needed in our times, and we see like religious institutions are human. They may be a vessel of the divine, but I mean, none of them are immune to flaw and error. So I don't know, like, should we just abandon them, or is there something more that's worth staying here for? Like, that's for me, that was like the spiritual takeaway. But then just like as a work of scholarship, I have to say it was completely refreshing because it's rare that you find someone writing about such topics from such a fair, objective perspective that's not, like I said, it's not overly pietistic, it's not overly skeptical. You're just looking at reality and saying what you see. And I hope that this is an example for other scholars because like this is I don't know, it's an example to be followed. And I'm very grateful that you put this book out.
well, I appreciate what you're saying very much, because there are, as we were saying before we started recording, um, the book has had two very hostile reviews. It will probably get more. There are diehard materialists who just assume that since these events are really impossible, all the testimonies are lies or delusions. So it it there's always a price to be paid for pushing back the edge of the envelope, so to speak, and trying to establish a new approach or new paradigm of analyzing certain evidence. But I think we're in a very special time now, where I think there might be a return to viewing these impossible events in a more detached manner, and not simply by assuming that they are absolutely impossible. Um, because at the subatomic level and at the farthest outer limits of astrophysics, discoveries keep being made that show that our grasp of reality, our understanding of what we call real, um, is very limited.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping things will move forward. I had a very nice conversation with a doctoral student here at Yale who's in computer science and is developing artificial intelligence. He's actually one of these individuals on the cutting edge, on the forefront of developing artificial intelligence. But he takes these questions very seriously about what is the context in which our material universe exists and what lies beyond the material. Imagine creating artificial intelligence. You're going to some other level of reality, creating an intelligence, basically a mind. And the whole question of whether or not it will ever become conscious is out there very much,
Yeah.
on the minds of everybody, not just the people who are creating artificial intelligence. So maybe the times they are changing.
They certainly are. I would say for the better in many cases. But yeah, I mean, I really strongly suggest people get this book because above all, like it's a real source of hope. I think it will incite hope in a lot of people. And with that, Carlos, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. Thank you very, very much. I enjoyed this immensely.
Right.